Hey, how's everyone doing? Is everyone active again after the coffee break? I hope so. Um, yeah, let's get into it right here. So, hey, I'm Tim. I work for Zeit, a cloud hosting company, and I'm one of the lead maintainers and co-authors of Next.js, of course. It's right behind me on the screen. And it's a framework for React. But let's back up a bit first. So generally when you start building websites or web applications, you need some kind of component system. And the reason for that is that you don't want like 10 versions of the same button or something like that, right? So you want to use something like React. It could also be something else, but you all really like React, I hope. So React is simple, right? And it's simple in the way that you can actually just write a function that returns some, not really JavaScript, but it's HTML-like syntax, XML, called JSX, of course. And it just looks like this. So this is hello world, right? However, implementing a full React app often feels like this, where you're just looking at your screen and you're like, all these build tools and all these other things, how do I set this up? Like, what am I going to do with my life? I want to actually make money on the projects that I'm doing, right? So in reality, this has gotten quite a lot easier in recent years. But going to production is a really complex process still. And so you need some kind of framework for React if you want to use React, right? Because React doesn't just cover one thing. It actually covers, well, it only covers one thing. So it only covers the rendering layer, but you need more to go to production with your app, right? So you need something that scales with your project. So in general, you start off with like a static website, right? And as your project grows, pages get added to that website. And these may have different requirements. So that means that you could have like dynamic rendering or static rendering or something else like client-side rendering, for example, right? But your project is static. You started out as a static site generator, for example. So how do I make my app scale with like these changes? Because like I can only generate static sites through my static site generator. And furthermore, how do you make your app scale with the size of your application? Like you add in like all these other like components and different views and like all these different things, and they basically bloat your bundle. And you don't want to download the settings page if you're going to the home page, right? And in general, that happens quite often if you don't watch out yourself. So it's something like this, like this graph where the bundle affects the time to interactive and rendering of the page. So this is where Next comes in. And Next helps you scale your project through all these different requirements and makes the developer experience really good. So you generally start by creating a pages directory, and this is where I'm going to switch to live coding this thing. And I've never done this before, so bear with me, but we're going to make the best of it. So you start by creating a pages directory, and I hope this is clear enough. But I'm basically going to use my terminal, which is Hyper, and VS Code as the editor. So you basically start off and you do yarn, add, next, react, and react DOM. And you install React, React DOM, and the Next library. And what you then do is you go to your package.json, and you need to add in some scripts, right? So the scripts are dev, which is mapped to next dev, build, which is mapped to next build, and start, which is mapped to next start. Simple enough, right? I didn't miss anything. Oh, I missed a comma. Okay. So sounds simple enough, right? So dev starts up your next dev server, builds the production bundle, and then start boots up the app. And like I said in my slide, I'm going to create a pages directory. So you start out with this pages directory, and then in every file in the pages directory is actually mapped to a route. So that means that if I create index.js, and I hear all the people in the crowd that love TypeScript shout, TypeScript, please. But I'm going to start with JavaScript first. So you export default a function that returns some HTML, right? Just plain React. So like hello world, And what we're then going to do is we boot up the dev server. So we say yarn dev. In my case, I use yarn. You can also use like npm run dev, etc. And it boots up the Next.js dev server. And once you go to this dev server, I'm going to zoom this in a bit. You can see that it shows hello world. We successfully built a React app right now. It's amazing, right? But you can also see that once you make changes, and you add in, like, for example, 2 exclamation marks, it live reloads. And this comes all out of the box. So every page is mapped to a different route. So that means that if I create another file called about.js, and I'm going to just copy this because like we don't want to type everything out, of course. And you say like hello about, for example. And then without rebooting anything or doing anything else, you go to /about, and it just works, right? So it maps all the routes like that, and then you can also link between them. So if you are like, oh, I'm now on the about page, but I want to go to the homepage again, you can import next link, which is our custom link component. And then we'll turn this into a thing that can have more items. So you create a link, for example, and href is / of course, because we're going to homepage. And you put in a tag and you say, go to homepage, right? And you save it and it's probably, okay, yeah, like that. So now we have a go to homepage link, and if you click that, it goes to the homepage. Quite easy so far. However, what if you want to do, I hear you all thinking like, you're based on a file system, we're creating like these hard-coded routes. What if I want to do like, say, product/slug or something like that? So let's go into that. So you create a product, for example, directory. And directories are also routed. So if you create a products directory, it will actually be /products. And anything you put under there will be under /products, of course. So if you then say with brackets slug.js, and you export default another function, and I'm just going to return it like this and say page1 hello product. And now you go to /products hello, for example. So that's hello product. So it writes those, right? But you generally want to use them. So what you can do is actually import a React hook, which is called useRouter. And then basically get the router value. So you can do router is useRouter. And then get the router value, which is I guess router.query, query.hello, for example. Or no, I don't mean hello, I mean slug. Okay. So hello, hello. But let's do something else. So let's say you're selling a book. It's hello book, right? And what you can see is if I refresh here, that it flashes, right? And the reason for that is that this page is actually pre-rendered. That means that it's built at build time to a static HTML page. So if you want to wait for some data to load, for example, because it's not, in general, you're not reading like query values directly into your HTML. You actually want to fetch something based on them, right? So if you want to build next to a static page, a dynamic page, you can actually turn this into a product function. So it's like product, and then you export default the product. And product.getInitialProps is added. And that's also a function, but it's asynchronous. So the async function, let me see if I can make this work like this. Okay. So you have an async function, and getInitialProps is something that Next adds to allow you to do data fetching. So if you return a object here, and you basically get in like query string, and then the query has a slug value. So I'm just structuring that out right now. So what you'll see is if I return the slug here, or let's just do, yeah, let's do this, okay. So then it passes that in as props. So you got basically like the props there, and slug will be part of the props. So this means that we can get rid of the router because that is all there. We'll just read out slug and a refresh, and it just works, right? So the difference between these two is that actually now the icon is gone, like the pre-rendered icon. That means that it's not a static page anymore. It's actually a server-rendered page. So every page can say like, I want this to be statically rendered, or I want this to be server-side rendered. And you can actually see that. So you can say like hello book. Oh, it's adding in a comment there, but it's hello book, right? And if I go to like hello books, it will be hello books in the HTML. So this is all like indexed by Google and like all search engines. And it helps with like SEO mostly, and also performance. So yeah, so every page is mapped to a path, and you can do dynamic writing, of course. But what is a page? It's the React component that you saw me export. However, generally choosing between these pages is, I'm just going to try and put this up on the screen again. Generally, like choosing between like server-rendered applications or statically rendered or client-side rendered is very much a hard choice. So hard being you choose it and you can't change down the road. Your manager can't walk in and say like, oh, we're going to do this like dynamic app now, right? Because you have to build like something new in a different framework or something like that. So the Google team actually created this very helpful graph to help you choose between like what are the trade-offs that I want to make, because it's generally a game of trade-offs. It's not that every case works for every application that you're building. However, Next allows you to basically cover most of these spectrums in one application, and you choose per page what you want to do, basically. So it still feels like this if you see that table, right? So Next can actually do pre-rendering, as I showed, like it renders to static HTML. It can do server-side rendering, which is you can get some data from the server and then like render it. You can do client-side rendering, so like client-side only. And you can even go beyond React. And let's just go into live coding again. So actually, let's do this first. Has anyone heard of AMP before? It's a standard. I see a lot of hands going up. Not everyone has heard of it, mostly, I guess. But it's a standard that Google started to basically enforce fast web applications, or fast websites at least. It's mostly used by like news publishers and that kind of thing to make their pages fast that have ads and like that kind of thing. However, implementing AMP pages is a different HTML spec. So it's like a subset of HTML basically. And you have to know all these specific things to make things work. So Next can actually render to AMP. As you can see, this is one of the search engine results. So basically, AMP works in a way that basically loads your the HTML that you provide inside of Google instead of like going to the actual page. And that makes it really fast when you're browsing to Google, for example, or Bing, or like some other search engines that support this. So you can basically do multiple things, and I'll go back to live coding. So say we take the index page. This is just the hello world, right? So all you have to do is export default, export const config. Let me see if this is going to work. Did I write it wrong? Oh, I didn't. Okay, this is just a different syntax highlighting. So you can do AMP true, and that should be it. So let's see if that works. To zoom out a little bit, and it doesn't. Wait, am I doing something wrong? I'm just going to go to the Next.js docs, and you can all laugh at me now. So AMP, no, it is AMP true, but I'm probably doing something wrong. Wrong page? Oh, I'm still on the wrong page. Sure, you're right. Thank you for shouting. I don't know where you are. I'm going to give you a hand after. So I'm on the wrong page. That is obviously what you do in development, right? So Woo here has done that before, going to like the wrong page, being like updating everything. It's not like everyone has done that, right? I'm just standing in front of like 800 people doing that. So, so okay, so here we go. The page is AMP, and AMP is basically like AMP requires this boilerplate to work and like all these other things. Except in Next, it's just like export const config AMP true and everything works. Mostly. I wouldn't say that everything will work like immediately if you do that, but basically AMP has this validator that's very strict, so you have to change some stuff in your app if you're like doing it on an existing app. But if you're starting out building it, this is AMP first, so that means that the whole application is AMP, or the whole page, because it's per page. And that means that, so if you go here, you can actually see that it is powered by AMP, even on desktop, not even on mobile, not even like, it's everywhere. So it's like not only on mobile, it's on desktop too. However, in many cases, you're like, maybe I just want to try out this AMP thing and like have my app just keep working on desktop and other cases, right? So there's also hybrid AMP. So that means that if you say AMP hybrid, and you can see actually the jumping here if you were very observant. But that means that's because the AMP boilerplate has some like CSS resets and that kind of thing. So it's something to keep in mind. So this means that the hello world is a Next.js app, right? It has all the scripts that Next has. I'll just try to zoom this in again. Not that you can read it because it's like minified HTML, but basically what you'll see is you'll see a link rel AMP HTML that links to AMP1. And if you go to that page, it's actually the AMP rendered HTML. So you can choose between like hybrid AMP, AMP first, or no AMP if you don't want to opt into that. Because it's completely opt-in, it's not required at all. And we also, if you like make mistakes in your AMP pages, so I'll just put like an image tag, because AMP doesn't support images, so if you go to like static/something.png, this doesn't exist, but it doesn't matter that much. Okay, let's see. I closed my browser. So you go back to localhost 3000, and you'll see that this works, right? Because this is the hybrid AMP still. So if I now go to AMP1, it still renders, but it will, in the console, give you a message saying like, hey, you're using this tag, image, but image is not really valid AMP compliant HTML, so you have to use AMP-image. So how do you solve that, right? You basically have a React hook which is called useAmp. You can import it from next/amp. You can say isAmp is useAmp, and you can basically do isAmp will render AMP image. So AMP image like this, src. I'm not going to type that out, and I render the rest basically. So you might be thinking like, why does AMP have this AMP image thing, right? And it's because AMP image is slightly more strict in what you can do. You have to provide a width and a height to make it work. So it's like 100 by 100 or something like that. And now we refresh, and if it says that it's still broken, wait, let me see. Oh, it's not rendering that, I guess. Okay, now it's all fine. See, so it's easy to fix like AMP-specific bugs in this case. So let's see. Then we have, I'll just go back to my slides. So AMP first, all strategies can be combined. So you can say like, I have this statically rendered or pre-rendered app that has like hybrid AMP. Then I have client-side rendering for my dashboard. I have dynamic slugs, and I want to fetch like something from the server on your product pages, right? However, apps are generally not just a front end. So you need some backend to handle data, right? Like you all need some kind of backend to actually make things work. So generally this goes like you create a project, you install your favorite web server, which is in pretty much all cases Express. You create like an endpoint and you run your server on like a different port, and everything just magically tends to work, right? However, every time you make changes, you have to restart your app. So if you forget to restart your app, it will actually not work, and it will get the same thing that I had just now with going to the wrong page. Except now you have to restart your browser, which is like even harder to spot. You restart your server, which is hard to spot. And that means that you need an API server that can scale with like a project that has many different like API endpoints, that has like multiple services, that kind of thing, right? And you can actually create API endpoints in Next since Next 9, which means that inside of the pages directory, you can create an API directory, which maps to /API. And I'll go back to live coding again. So it basically means that you take this, let me see. So you take the pages directory, you create an API directory. You go in there, you say, this is going to be my hello world.js. And you export a function. And slightly different than React, you get a request and response, right? You all know this from like Node.js servers, Express, etc. So you can there return some JSON. So you can do like rest.json. And the JSON is actually like hello is world, right? And I see that I don't have that much time left, so we'll just go to /API. And I said hello-world. And it doesn't work because I stopped the dev server. That's my fault, it's not Next's fault. It's the human part that doesn't work, right? So here we go. Like we already have a hello world API endpoint ready. You can fetch that from your Next tab on the server, on the client side. It just works. And it can handle all kinds of things. So we also, for example, have like request.body and like all these other things that are just built in. Like you don't have to add in custom middlewares or something like that. So middlewares are included by default, react.query, react.body, react.cookies. Contrary to what you might think, these are not Node.js APIs, they're part of Express, but everyone thinks they are part of Node.js because it's like used that much. And they update as you make changes. So if you make changes to the app, it will just work. And your front end is just API endpoints and like all this React code, right? And you can't afford it to break because like then you'll lose money in many cases. And generally you want to prevent bugs, so you use like something like Typescript, right? So let's go back to live coding. I spoiled myself, but oh well. So let's say that we create a new page. Actually, we renamed the home page to index.tsx, right? Which is the TypeScript flavored JSX. So I'll just remove all this other stuff, because otherwise it will throw errors. And I'll remove this. So this is the most basic TypeScript setup. And it's going to say, hey, we see that you're using TypeScript, but you haven't installed any TypeScript stuff, right? So this is going to maybe take a while, but let's try it. Oh, it's really fast. Okay, amazing. So you boot it up again after installing your app, and we'll say, hey, you're using TypeScript in your project, but it's not set up yet. You have like a tsconfig that you need. But we'll set up your tsconfig for you. So this means that we'll set up the tsconfig, and it's actually here, right? It's the tsconfig for a React app that is using Next, so it works like with server-side, client-side, etc. And it just works. So that means that if I now go to the home page and I go to localhost 3000, it still works. And it's a TSX page, right? And this means that if you now add in, say, H or something like that, it will yell at you and say, like, H is not existing on types, right? And it will also say that here in your terminal. And it will also fill your build. So you do yarn build, which is next build. And it creates an optimized production build. And it should break right now and say, like, hey, you have this TypeScript error. We're not going to go to production because it's broken. Which it is, actually. Like, we have to fix this, right? So then there is, like, you don't need to set up tsconfig, of course, and it fills your build. An access core is written in TypeScript, so that means that if you import, like, next link, like I showed you, it will give you all the properties that it allows. And now you've built your project where you like want to fast forward into the future. You have like hundreds of pages, right? And every page you add is like making your production build slower. So we're rebuilding we're basically like working on something that avoids rebuilding pages that didn't change, the bundles itself. So this reduces build times from hours to milliseconds in some cases. So next skills with your project, and this goes from my personal website, which is not that popular, unfortunately, to Hulu, which is this massive streaming service from the US. So Next is being used in production to serve the main traffic of all these sites mentioned in the slide, which goes from TicketSwap, a company from Amsterdam actually, to Twitch, which is like 24th largest website of the internet, and many others that you probably recognize here. We also have a case study with Hulu if you want to learn more about like how they implemented Next, and it's available here. And if you want to learn more about using Next, you should look up nextjs.org/learn, which is this website that allows you to learn progressively, like with examples and that kind of thing, how to use Next for your Next app. Thank you very much.